I think it's best that we begin the eyebrow creation process by looking at photographic reference, specifically the man reference sheet, which has a bunch of different eyebrows. And as you study them, you'll realize that all brows share a core structure, though with, of course, the potential for variety. Ethnicity plays a role to a degree. Of course, some are bushier, some are thinner, some even connect, as is evidenced by this picture. Not fully connect into a unibrow, but clearly some follicles growing in between. But again, as long as we understand the core structure, we have a great chance at creating a believable eyebrow. And as we go, you'll see me bounce in between brow shapes, taking bits and pieces of inspiration or guidance from various pictures. Like this guy, I think, has basically perfect eyebrows, almost completely symmetrical. They grow very even, very, very kempt feeling, I guess. This guy has eyebrows that would arguably go on the same sort of person that we're creating, but they don't look quite as perfect. A little more caterpillar-esque, I suppose. But they do show off the core structure pretty well. So let's go over that. I'm going to use some annotations to kind of outline my thought process. I'm going to create 3 layers and then change the colors to be very obvious. And the first thing I want to outline is kind of the primary structure. Let's say if I were to draw this as a cartoon, where would the outline of the eyebrow be? And so I'm going to draw that. All right, so that's, say, a cartoon outline of the eyebrow. However, there isn't a sharp border to an eyebrow. It feathers out and the follicles diminish as we get to the border of the eyebrow. So really the geometry that we need to grow enough particles from needs to be our second layer and needs to extend beyond our primary outline. Something more like this. And then for our third layer, I'm going to turn the other 2 off, is the growth pattern of the follicles. So commonly, the inside of the brow, the hairs will grow kind of up and even in a little bit, but at least up, gradually turning the direction to follow the length of the brow. Okay, so that's part 1. Part 2 separates the upper and lower halves of the rest of the eyebrow, and that they often grow from top to bottom like this. And then the opposite on the bottom half. So they start growing up and then along the length like this. What's important about this structure is that it makes the inside of the brow, the middle part, the most dense. And that's very important for a believable brow shape. I would say that the upper and lower halves and the way this grows is the most important feature. Sometimes this growth pattern can change a little bit. Like if we look at the kind of perfect brow man, in my opinion, you know, the flow kind of starts the same way. You don't get it growing like this. But you definitely get the meeting in the middle, kind of almost like an arrow, right? So if that's like arrows pointing in the direction, that is a very, very important part of eyebrow structure. And so with that established, we can begin creating this. First thing I need is some geometry from which we will grow our particle hair from. Now, in this case, I won't harvest it from the base mesh of our head. I certainly could start from there, but I just don't want to worry about applying the shape keys and deleting the modifiers. Instead, I think it's going to save just a couple clicks or a few seconds to create a new plane object. So I'm going to, with my head selected, Shift-S, snap the cursor to the center of the head because I do want this new mesh plane to use the same origin. And I'm going to grab one vertex in edit mode and snap this to the surface. All right, let's rename this to eyebrow.l. All right, and so now we can begin extruding and snapping, basically retopologizing a specific eyebrow mesh. And let's take a look. Generally, the eyebrow will start in line with the edge of the nose. You can see down here, this one does the same thing. So from our front orthographic, and I'm going to first outline the basic shape. Let's turn on in front for our viewport display. All right, so we're just kind of blocking out how low the brow comes. You can see that it comes pretty close to the upper eyelid. Now, where does it stop? Visually, it stops a little bit outside of the eye, but then I have another angle. Let's see. Oh, this one. You can see the brow kind of stops a little behind the eye. Okay, so if we go to the 3 perspective, Ultimately, I'm going to want it to stop about here, but keep in mind that the growth pattern of the hair, if I stop the brow short, let's say here, the growth pattern, let me make sure my annotations are visible. The hair is going to start here and then grow this direction. So I want the base mesh to be short of that final brow length. And then we can just continue the top of the brow. Now, some brows come to a point. This guy, there isn't really a point at all. It's just like a, caterpillar shape. Same with this guy. There's not like any distinct corners to the brow. However, with this guy, there is a distinct corner. And that's often a common trait. This guy sort of has one too. It raises up and then comes down. So that's up to you if you want to implement that sort of shape. You would definitely start doing that in the base mesh. So I'm just going to put a little bit of one. I don't want to be too prominent. And it is thicker. I'm keeping in mind, if we go back to the annotations we drew, I'm keeping in mind the orange outline here to extend beyond the final density of our hairs. Okay, so it's going to feel big, in other words. And then I'm going to cut 2 more edge loops in the middle, kind of smooth out their shape. Make sure these central verts are snapped to the surface. Okay, this should be a good start. Although I feel like maybe I should bring the brow a little bit lower, just a touch lower. So I'm trying to imagine the amount of skin between the eyelid and the brow. Here it's a little bit more, but with this guy, they're much closer. So I'm kind of like splitting the difference. All right, I think this is going to be a good mesh. I'm going to turn off snapping. Alt-S to push this brow a little bit into the surface, which we can't tell because we have in front viewport display. Let's try it again. Alt-S and push it inside the mesh. Okay, now we can start growing our follicles. Let's jump over to our particle settings, create a new particle system, and I'll call it eyebrow.L. And then for the particle settings, we might as well start from the eyelashes particle data. So let's select that, eyelashes data, because this already has things set up like diameter of the hair follicles, some clumping, some roughness. The common settings are all engaged, so I would prefer to start from here rather than start from scratch. But I want to make sure I duplicate this into its own unique group before I change anything. So let's hit the 3 number. By the way, this is the users, how many objects are using this data. And so when you click that, it goes away because this is the only object using the data. And so we'll call it eyebrow data. And the first thing I want to establish is a number of follicles or the number of parent hairs that I am able to edit. If they're too many, it's unnecessarily cumbersome and complex to work with. If it's too few, we risk too many children hairs following too few parents, and that's often visibly noticeable. So based on rehearsal, I know that 100 is going to be good for this. The hair length, however, needs to be doubled to 0.014. Now that might seem long for an eyebrow, but a common problem I run into is too short after the fact. Once we've groomed it, I realize I wish these were longer. I think I've said it before, but it's easier to shrink hairs rather than grow them after the fact. So leaving them long is going to be better for us. And now I think we're ready to begin grooming. So we'll jump into particle edit. And like I outlined in the reference, I'm thinking in 3 parts, right? So we circle select the inner part of the brow, Control L, and I'm going to make these grow up first of all. So let's push them straight up. And if you see this intersection right here, it means that our emitter deflection is not the right distance. All right, so 0.25, this is basically saying I can't comb to intersect with our deflector, right? You see it stopping, but I need the distance to be greater. Let's try 0.5. You see it pops back out, and that's still intersecting our actual head mesh. So how about 0.75? Maybe even, let's just go to 1. There we go. That should give us enough wiggle room to avoid intersection. And then I'll comb the inside, kind of pointing inward. And then the outer follicles, I'll start to point down the length of our brow, like this. Then let's H to hide those. Let's select the top half of follicles. Control L after circle select. Shift L, I don't want to take that one. And we're going to comb these down and then along the length. So might as well just comb them all down first. And then come back and push them down the length of the brow in the middle. And then look at it from a different angle. Make sure they're not like sticking out too much. Brows do tend to hug the surface. Okay, so the deflection, the emitter deflection seems to be a problem here. It's like too much for some reason. So I'll turn it off temporarily, then turn it back on. H to hide those, A to select the whole bottom half, and then we'll comb up this time initially, and then comb them all down the length of the brow in the middle. Alt H to unhide everything. Okay, so let's see what that looks like initially. Let's go to rendered view. And it shouldn't have a material yet. It's just got the generic default material. But we do see that we have the structure of the brow set up pretty well. The most density is in the middle, but it's going to help to have a material to help guide the future edits we make. So we might as well start with the eyelashes material as well. But I will make changes, so let's duplicate it just like we did the particle data. Now it's a unique material, but starting from a good place. Eyebrow. And that's actually not too bad. They're definitely too long in places. So I'm trying to think, should I adjust the density and length of our particle system, or should I adjust the material first? I'm thinking the vertex groups actually. All right, so let's go to solid view and then make sure our brow is selected. Go to local view there, hitting the / key, and I'm going to create a couple vertex groups. I think it's going to be most important to get that established before we adjust the material any further. And we'll call this eyebrow underscore density first, and then another one, eyebrow length. And let's try length first. I'm going to tab into edit mode. Basically, I just want the outside edge to have a weight or a length of 0.5, and we'll assign that, and everything else to have a length of 1. All right, then we'll attach that to our particle system all the way at the bottom. Length. Okay, let's see what that looks like rendered and leaving local view. Okay, I definitely think that gives it an appropriate trim, and they're not too long. Yeah, I think that's definitely feeling more natural. We perhaps need a few more follicles. So in the children section under interpolated, let's go to 10. Let's look through our camera. How's that looking? 10 feels pretty good. Maybe the central section here is a little too concentrated. So it feels like really dense in a thin middle area, and I could spread that out based on our reference. All right, so let's go back to particle mode. And you can probably tell by now that the hair grooming process is definitely not linear. I'm always bouncing around between combing the particles, adjusting particle settings, vertex groups, and the material. It's bouncing around all of them. But hopefully watching me bounce around by the end, you'll get a good idea about how this workflow goes. And we'll jump into particle edit mode. And a technique I like to use here is the select random. All right, if we do that, we can select random particles based on a ratio. And I like to go a little bit lower, like 0.2. And this way I can keep 80% of the follicles the same and just move around 20%. All right, so we'll come in here. Well, I actually like the way this looked. But here in the middle, let's specifically go to our smooth. Okay, that's a little bit too strong. How about 0.1? Let's try smoothing these in the middle. This should give us some variety. We can also look at the children while we're doing it. I don't think that was quite enough of the effect that I needed. Yeah, it's starting to spread out a little bit. All right, let's jump over to our particle settings then, because I feel like the clumping is a little bit too strong. All right, underneath children, yeah, clumping at 0.9. Let's see, what if I go to 0.5? I think that's looking better, but I still feel like clumps going on, right? Like there's an empty space right here, and then some clumps are closer together. I don't know, I just feel like it's kind of spotty right now. So If it's feeling spotty, I'll go down to the end point under roughness and just hold shift, because it's a very sensitive setting, and start to bring it up. Maybe if we look in solid view, we can see that happen in real time. All right, so what this does is kind of spread all the follicles out from one another. And that should help to not feel so clumped together. All right, since it's feeling better, but it's still not going away right here in that specific section. So let's go back to particle edit and see if I can find, yeah, let's grab a particle and move it down. Whoops, not smooth, but comb. Okay, there we go. Yeah, sometimes just grabbing a follicle and moving it into position to cover a bare spot is your best bet. Okay, that's feeling better. All right, now how about density? Similar to length, I like to try, let's see, we need our overlays. I like to do a similar setup where the inside verts are at full density and then the outside verts are less. Like, let's go to 0. Whoops, I forgot to assign them. Assign at 0. And then we'll go back to particle settings and select that vertex group for density. But I want to see it happen in the render. Okay, yeah. You see that our follicles got much denser in the middle while being fewer on the borders. So I think this does help with feathering out the border of the brow, though I feel like I lost too much density on the inside. Let's go back and add that density. Let's go to like 0.5. Okay, yeah, I think that's feeling pretty good. Although still maybe a little bit long on the inside. So let's take our length down to like 0.2, assign. Okay, I think we're at a decent natural place. Perhaps we can refine this with our material. So currently we're using the hair BSDF shader, but this is actually only one component of hair at a time. We have this mode for reflection or transmission. Reflection is what it sounds like, how the hair reflects light. Transmission is how it absorbs light. So often when you have like a backlit render of hair, let's see if we have an example of that here somewhere. Probably not. All right, I'm gonna have to put one in there in the video edit. But when strong light hits the hair, you get this sort of glowing effect, and that's the hair absorbing some of the light. And so for that, you would use the transmission. However, we have another hair-centric shader called Principled Hair BSDF, which combines them. So this is a more holistic shader, and we're going to use that for the scalp hair, and we're going to try it for the eyebrow as well. So let's take the color, plug it in there, Shift-Control, click on that. And it immediately goes a lot brighter, maybe because it is soaking up some of the light. And so maybe these color values are just a little bit too bright. I still want the same sort of thing, right? Where we want the root to be lighter as it grows into the skin, and then the center to be darker towards the tip. So let's bring that down. Maybe take this one, both of these down further into a dark range. Okay, maybe it's time to do a render of this. Well, actually, now that I'm looking at it, I feel like maybe my base mesh is a little bit too broad. Like the top edge could just come down to kind of squash our eyebrow overall. So let's do that. So you take the top edge, G twice to slide it down, and then slide down the other edges as well, just so that it's more even. Okay, yeah, that does feel better. Though I do feel like the transition of the follicles, it was a little strong. Okay, so you see how the hairs just grow right into the skin? Here we see that transition that I'm after. It's a little more subtle. So perhaps we go to B-spline. See what that looks like plugged into the material. All right, I do feel like that transition helps right on the ends there to kind of soften the hair. Maybe I can concentrate the outside particle hairs inward. They're a little bit just like splayed out. So let's bring those in to be a little tighter. The part of that looks like the roughness settings that we established. All right, let's do a proper render and then decide where to go from there. All right, let's take a closer look. All right, the color isn't great. It's a little too grayish, so I need to go darker. But the structure of the hair, I think I like. It's already feeling more natural as a human being to have eyebrows at all above the eye. But as I zoom in, I feel like the end point setting we enabled, spreading out the hairs universally from the parent hair, gives it a very soft look and kind of not distinguished look to the eyebrow. And I want some of that, but I pretty much want it concentrated maybe around the edges. So we could try to use the vertex groups we've already created, like density and length, to control the roughness and maybe even the clumping. I would like to see a bit more clumping towards the middle, right? There is some like patchiness. Well, that's not the right word. I don't want patchiness, but I do want clumping. The difference being clumping happens along the whole hair and patchiness is kind of isolated to little sections. But let's adjust these settings and see if we get closer to what I'm after. So let's see. Let's try roughness first. And I think roughness end is what I want. End meaning endpoint. And so if I change that to density, all right, that would mean 0 roughness on the outside and full roughness on the inside. So what if we reverse that? Okay, that's a little more like it. All right, so we get more concentration in the middle, but it's rougher and kind of spread apart on the outside. What are my clump settings? I went to 0.5. What if we go to 1? All right, definitely more clumping. I think I like the more clumping. Helps to turn off overlays. Maybe not quite that much, like 0.7. Okay, one important roughness setting that I haven't addressed at all yet is the random value. So let's go back to solid view so we can see what that's doing. All right, so if we just shift, click, and drag in the random setting, remember this randomizes certain follicles, and I feel like it's kind of pushing all of them a little too uniformly in a certain direction. I think that has to do with the size being too large. So what if we go down to 1? Okay, that's too small. You don't want it to be squiggly like that. How about 2? It's feeling a little bit better. The value is definitely too high still. So this is at 0. Shift, drag up a little bit. And then the threshold, the higher we go, the less effect. Let's see. How does that look now in the render? It's just feeling a little too uniform. And the idea with this being to get more variety. How about, all right, as I go down, ooh, I like 0.1 maybe. All right, so I did go down to 1 again on the size, just to see what that does. I don't quite get the squiggly effect in the render. Okay, I think that's pretty good. All right, I don't want to focus too much on getting it perfect right now. Again, it's better to do an initial pass on everything and then let the quality of it marinate over time as you address other things. So I think this is good for a first phase of the eyebrows in terms of the groom and particle settings. Let's just try to dial in our material a bit better. Maybe go like full black on this. And then on the upper side, maybe saturate it more towards orange. Maybe add another flag here, make it dark. Okay, I'm seeing some variety now. Some are kind of lighter. I think that's what I'm missing. It's too homogeneous in terms of colors. So how about we try to vary that up a bit? Let's see, we can use the random socket here. If I add, let's duplicate this color ramp and hit the backspace key. All right, and we take the random value, which basically takes all your hair follicles and assigns a random value between black and white. And then with the color ramp, if I kind of drag up the flag, the black flag, we'll start to isolate only certain follicles for a lighter color. Or just a different color. I'm going to go with a lighter color. But okay, we can start to see the squiggliness. So maybe 1 is too bad. Yeah, okay. 2 seems to be better. All right, so let's just see what that looks like. 2, I mean in terms of the random roughness. And let's simply add that. Add a color mix node. use this as a factor, use this black and white random color data for the factor, and then from here I can control exactly how light or what color these follicles are. And then this goes into our principled BSDF. Let's see, we don't really see much effect happen. What if we change the roughness, make them a little bit shinier, like 0.2? Okay. Let's make our random follicles a little bit brighter. I'm just not seeing much of an effect. Okay, then, well, let's try a different approach. Let's make it a overlay, trying to make some follicles brighter, some darker. That's not really working. Yeah, definitely not. I think it needs to be, what about an add? Okay, I think I am seeing more variety. Are there too few hairs? I'm just trying to figure out why it's not dark. I mean, the colors are pretty much to black. Okay, maybe that's what I need, perhaps. Should there be more hairs? Might as well try it. Let's increase the hair count. Let's try 20. Maybe 15. All right, let's do a render for comparison. Okay, let's take a closer look. Full resolution. This is after. This is before. Okay, yeah, I think that's looking a lot better. Much more natural. Perhaps a little bit of brighter colors here in the reflections. It will help to do tests for multiple lighting scenarios. But as a first pass, I'm feeling really good about this eyebrow. Let's go ahead and duplicate it to the other side, and then we'll probably close it out again as a first pass. All right, so solid view. The way we're going to duplicate this, I don't want it to be the same. Eyebrows, I think, rarely look identical in terms of symmetry. There's always a little bit of difference, and if they are symmetrical, that will stand out pretty bad. So we're going to take our eyebrow.l, Shift D to duplicate it, rename it to be .r, and then with our pivot point, remember it's at the center of the head, so I should be able to just scale negatively in X and then leave it scaled negatively in X. Most of the time you don't want to use negatively scaled values unless you know what you're doing, and in this case I know it's going to do what I want, but I guess I'm just trying to say be careful. It's one of those tools that when used properly is great, but also can cause a lot of problems if used improperly. And let's see how this is relating to the surface. It looks like it's still inside the head geometry. All right, we'll go to rendered view, take a look, make sure we have both of those selected in the border render box. And then to make our right eyebrow asymmetrical, we do still have access to editing the particles. So if we jump into particle edit mode, I can still move these around. Now I want to be careful not to make too many drastic changes. I still want the structure of the eyebrow to be consistent between both sides, but I just want to move them enough so that they're not exactly the same. And so I'll use our select random technique. Let's go with, let's say 50% of the follicles, and then, move them around just a bit. I actually think maybe let's do 2 select random operations at a lower ratio, like 0.2. And then we'll move these around. And that's honestly probably enough without doing another pass. Although the biggest change, maybe if I just kind of angle these more down the length of the eyebrow rather than sticking up. We can see that sort of happening in this guy's reference. So on his right eyebrow, none of them are pointed up and in like they are over here. There we go. That's going to be enough to not be perfectly symmetrical. Okay, so let's do a render and be done with this first pass. Okay, another look. And yeah, I think those look pretty good. On this side, I'm getting a little more kind of stringy and patchy. Yeah, I definitely think I'll need to update these, but as a general lesson on creating eyebrows, I think we've accomplished that. As a first pass, I'm fairly happy. But where are my eyelashes? Did I hide those? It's looking weird again, all of a sudden noticing my eyelashes are missing. Wait, what? What is happening? Okay, somehow I moved these objects, the eye meniscus, both of them, and both eyelashes. Really strange. Okay, but this brings up a good point. You've noticed that with the eyebrow, I put the object origin at the center of the head. Well, the same as the head. And I did that also with the eyelashes and eye meniscuses so that I know they all could be moved to the same position and correct stupid issues like this. I don't know when I move these off, but if I hit Shift S, snap selection to cursor, that should put them all in the exact same place. Okay, so let me render one more time with the eyelashes involved. Okay, let's try that again. Yeah, definitely fully natural with the eyebrows and eyelashes. So with that rendering correctly, we'll call that the end of the initial eyebrow pass.